Okay, so AI literacy. It's everywhere these days. We're diving into this paper, AI Literacy for All. It's about how we should approach teaching about AI in this crazy world. And their big argument, it's not just for, like, the computer science people anymore. It's for everybody.
Yeah, it's wild, right? Like, the paper really uses the whole ChatGPT thing to drive that point home.
Right, like AI isn't this, like, behind-the-scenes thing anymore. It's affecting all of us every day.
Totally. It's front and center now.
Which makes this idea of AI literacy for all even more important. They lay out these 4 pillars of AI literacy that kind of form the basis of this curriculum they're proposing.
Yeah, it's more than just knowing how to use the tools.
Exactly. It's about understanding them, like really getting it.
So the first pillar they talk about is the technical stuff, understanding the scope and technical dimensions of AI. This is where you get into the nitty-gritty of how AI actually works, things like machine learning, natural language processing, and even how these large language models like ChatGPT are trained.
So it's about going deeper than just the surface level.
Right, like understanding the core concepts, the nuts and bolts.
Gotcha. But it's not all tech, right?
No, definitely not. The second pillar is about how we interact with AI, learning how to interact with generative AI in an informed and responsible way. It's like, okay, you know how it works, but now how do you use it? And how do you use it well? And responsibly, too. It's about recognizing what AI can do, but also being aware of the potential pitfalls.
Yeah, like those biases everyone's talking about.
Exactly. Bias, privacy concerns, even the impact on things like academic integrity.
It kind of feels like that's where a lot of the anxiety around AI comes from,
Yeah.
People using these crazy powerful tools without really understanding the downside.
100%.
Okay, so that takes us to the third pillar, critically reviewing the issues of ethical and socially responsible AI in learning work environments.
It's getting into those ethical questions that come with AI, right?
Right, like how it impacts fairness, data security, the future of work even. These are big conversations we need to be having. Definitely. You see these conversations happening more and more. It's unavoidable now.
For sure.
And that brings us to the last pillar, social and future implications of AI. This one's about the big picture, like how AI is reshaping society, the whole shebang.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that the paper doesn't just paint this doom and gloom picture.
Yeah.
It's more about like, hey, we need to be actively shaping the future of AI, how it impacts public perception, policy decisions, even how we can use it for good.
I like that, AI for good. That's inspiring. But one thing they emphasize is that AI literacy isn't like a one-size-fits-all thing.
Right. They say what a high school student needs to know about AI is different from what's important for someone working in, like finance or someone making policy.
Totally different worlds.
Yeah, and they actually suggest specific learning outcomes tailored for those different groups. It's cool how their curriculum is designed to be super adaptable. Like it can work for K-12 classrooms all the way to like university courses and even professional development programs.
It needs to be flexible with how fast things are changing, right?
For sure. So let's dig into those learning outcomes a bit. Starting with that first pillar, understanding the scope and technical dimensions of AI. What do they actually recommend for, say, those different groups?
Well, they break it down into a bunch of key areas. They start with a basic intro to AI and machine learning. What is AI? What's its history? What can you even do with it? And then all the different parts within AI. Like it's not just one thing.
Makes sense. Like you need that foundation before you can really get into the more complicated stuff.
Yeah, you got to start somewhere. And then from there, they go into how knowledge is represented in AI. And they contrast like symbolic AI, which uses rules and symbols, with connectionist AI, which is all about those neural networks.
That's where it starts to get really interesting.
Right. And then it gets even more technical.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they even go into how search engines work, like at their core. Something we use every day, but probably don't think much about how they actually like work.
I'm guilty of that.
Right. But then they take it even further and talk about generative systems and something called retrieval augmented generation, or RA.
Hooray, what's that all about?
So basically, it combines regular search engines with these generative models, like the ones behind ChatGPT, to create totally new content based on what it finds through searching.
Ooh.
I know. It's wild. It shows how AI is moving beyond just like finding information. It's actually making new information.
That's crazy.
Right. And to really understand that, you got to understand how these large language models work. Things like how they're trained, what parameters and features are, and how they're fine-tuned to do specific things. They even get into how to evaluate these models, which is important.
Yeah.
Because it helps you figure out like what they're good at and what they're not.
They don't hold back on the details.
Nope. It's like they're trying to give people this deep understanding of how it all works behind the scenes, not just here's how to use the tool. It's like, here's how the tool thinks.
It's important, right? Like that's how you form your own opinions about it all.
Yeah, for sure. So we've talked about the basic building blocks of AI and how knowledge works within these systems. We've even gone into search engines and touched on this amazing world of generative AI, including those complex large language models. But now let's shift gears a bit and talk about how we can actually interact with these powerful tools in a way that's, responsible and informed.
Yeah, so the second pillar, learning how to interact with generative AI in an informed and responsible way, it's like it builds on all that technical stuff we were just talking about.
Right, exactly. Like now we know how it works. Let's talk about actually using it, but using it the right way.
Right, exactly. So they start by talking about the different types of large language models, those LLMs. There are closed source ones, and then there are open source models.
Oh, so like the ones from companies that they keep all secret.
Yeah, exactly. Like they
Yeah.
have all these fancy capabilities, but, how they work is a mystery.
Top secret.
Right. And then you've got open source models where everything is out in the open. You can see how they work, and the whole community can contribute to them.
It's like the difference between using some program where you have no idea what's happening and then like being able to look under the hood and tinker with the code yourself.
Exactly. And the paper really emphasizes that understanding these differences is important for making good choices about which tools to use and how to use them responsibly. And then they go into best practices for interacting with these models, things like how to write good prompts, how to set the right parameters for the AI's responses, and always thinking about the ethical side of what you're asking it to do.
Prompt engineering, that's like a whole new skill now.
It is. It's like you got to learn the language of AI to get the best results.
You got to speak AI.
Right. And it's super important in education, because we want to use AI to actually help students learn, not just like do the work for them.
Right. We don't want to create a generation of AI cheaters.
Exactly. And that's why they bring up this whole issue of academic and professional integrity in this AI age.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Right. It is a big one.
Yeah.
The paper talks about understanding codes of conduct and what actually constitutes academic misconduct, things like plagiarism and cheating, obviously. And it also stresses the importance of knowing the rules about AI use and, what could happen if you break those rules.
Like, don't mess around. There are consequences.
Exactly. It's about setting clear boundaries for both students and professionals. Everyone needs to know how to use AI ethically and responsibly.
So no AI joyrides. Got it.
Exactly. And this all ties back to this bigger idea of responsible AI use, which is really the heart of that third pillar we talked about, critically reviewing the issues of ethical and socially responsible AI in learning work environments. It's about understanding that AI is powerful, but it needs to be used carefully, thoughtfully, and with real consideration for the potential impact it can have.
We can't just like unleash it and see what happens.
Right. We have to think it through. And the paper goes into some key areas where things get tricky.
Like what kinds of things?
Well, they start with the idea of responsible AI use itself, maximizing benefits while minimizing any harm. It doesn't matter if you're using AI in a classroom or in a big company, the idea is the same. Be mindful of the downsides, make sure you're using it in a way that's actually good.
So it's not just about like, can we do this? It's about, should we do this?
Exactly. And then there's the whole thing about AI compliance, regulations. As AI becomes more a part of our lives, we need rules, guidelines to make sure it's being used ethically, responsibly, especially when it comes to things like data privacy and algorithmic transparency.
Oh, yeah. So we know what data is being used and how those algorithms are making decisions.
Exactly. And the paper is big on understanding and following those rules. And they also warn against relying too much on generative AI. Like, we can't just take what it spits out as, gospel truth. We need to still think for ourselves. There needs to be that human oversight.
Because, like we were talking about before, if you put garbage in, you get garbage out.
Right.
Wow.
100%. If you feed these systems bad data, biased data, the results are going to be messed up. So knowing where that data comes from, how it's being used, what biases might be baked into it, that's super important if we want AI to be fair.
And don't even get me started on security and privacy.
Right. As these AI systems get smarter and smarter, we need to be thinking about how to keep them secure, how to prevent them from being used for bad stuff. Like, what if someone uses AI to spread misinformation or even worse, to develop autonomous weapons?
Scary stuff.
It is scary stuff. And that's why the paper goes into all these different ethical frameworks and guidelines that people are developing to address these concerns. It's about making sure AI is developed and used in a way that, aligns with our values, that benefits all of humanity, not just a select few.
So it's not just about preventing the bad stuff. It's also about making sure AI is used for good, like we were talking about earlier.
Right. And there's this idea of human AI collaboration that they talk about, like co-creative AI. It's about working with AI, not being afraid of it replacing us, but seeing it as a tool to help us do things we couldn't do on our own.
Like combine our strengths.
Exactly. Imagine what we could do if we combine human creativity with the power of AI.
Endless possibilities.
Right. But for that to work, we need trust. And that's where this idea of explainable AI comes in. If we can understand how AI is making decisions, we're more likely to trust those decisions.
Transparency is key.
Totally. And that means we need to be constantly evaluating these systems, not just for how well they work technically, but also for their security, their privacy, and, the ethical implications of their use.
So we've gone through a lot, from the technical details of all these different types of AI to the sometimes confusing ethical questions around them.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground for sure. But this is really just the beginning. That fourth pillar, social and future implications of AI, that's where things get even bigger. Like how AI is changing the whole world, not just little parts of it.
This last pillar, social and future implications of AI, it really gets to the heart of why we're even talking about AI literacy. It's not just about understanding the tech stuff. It's about understanding how AI is changing the whole world and what that means for all of us.
It's like we're not just watching this happen, we're part of it. And the choices we make now, They're going to shape what the future with AI looks like.
No pressure.
Yeah.
So the paper starts by looking at how the public sees AI, like what people think about it. And that's shaped by a lot of things, what we see in movies, what we hear from, the media, and our own experiences.
It's interesting, though, right? They make this point that those perceptions, whether they're like right or wrong, they can really impact how AI is developed and how people use it.
Oh, totally. Like, think about those sci-fi movies with, like, the evil robots taking over the world.
Exactly. Those stories, they might be fun to watch, but they can also make people afraid of AI, right? And that fear can hold us back from, like, actually using AI to do good things.
So they're saying that part of being AI literate is, like, busting those myths, being more transparent about AI so people understand it better.
Yeah. It's about having these open conversations about the good and the bad so we can get a more realistic view of AI. And this is especially important when we start thinking about how AI is going to change the way we work.
That's a big one. Lots of people are worried about AI taking their jobs. Yeah, then those worries make sense. But the paper, it doesn't present it as like the end of the world. It's more like, okay, work is going to change. AI is going to create new jobs we can't even imagine right now. But it's also going to, replace some jobs that exist today.
It's like adapt or die.
Kind of, yeah. It's about being flexible, both as individuals and as a society.
So we got to be ready to learn new skills.
Right.
Exactly. Upskilling, reskilling, whatever you want to call it. It's not just about learning how to use the AI tools themselves. It's about those other skills, like critical thinking, creativity, being able to adapt to new situations. Those are going to be super important in this AI-powered world.
And that brings us to, like, the whole policy side of things. If AI is going to be everywhere, we need some rules, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. AI policy is huge. As AI gets more powerful, we need clear regulations and guidelines to make sure it's being used ethically, responsibly, and for the benefit of everyone, not just a few.
It's like setting up those guardrails. Yeah.
No, exactly. It's about establishing ethical frameworks, making sure that innovation is responsible, and addressing those concerns we talked about before, like bias, privacy, security. The paper gets into different approaches to AI governance, the different groups involved, and how the history of policymaking plays a role. It's complicated.
But super important.
Definitely. And it's not just about preventing the bad stuff. The paper also talks about how AI can be used to make things better, like in sustainability and development.
Oh, yeah. AI for good, like we were talking about earlier.
Right. AI could help us solve some of the world's biggest problems, like climate change, poverty, even global health crises. They even have this case study about accessibility and how AI can help create a more inclusive society for people with disabilities.
That's really cool.
It is. It shows how AI can empower people and actually make lives better.
It all comes back to that choice we have, right? Are we going to use AI to build a better world, or are we going to let it make things worse?
And that's why AI literacy is so important. It gives us the knowledge to make those choices, to have those conversations, to speak up for the kind of future we want. It's about understanding that the future of AI, it's not set in stone. We're all creating it together.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah.
It's been amazing going through this paper with you. It's given me a lot to think about.
Me too. It's definitely challenging, but also really inspiring. And hopefully it's done the same for our listeners. AI literacy, it's not just for techies anymore. It's for everyone. It's how we navigate this crazy, amazing 21st century.
And beyond. Well, that's about all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks so much for joining us today. We hope you found it informative and, maybe even a little bit inspiring. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those important questions about the role of AI in our lives.